Ready for this? What's your name? So we started last week talking about the names of God. And when we get to know his name, we're not just knowing a name. We're actually getting to know who he is. So a name is an expression of character. When you get to know God's name, you get to know him. So it's not just information. When you get to know his name, it's kind of, when you get to know the name, there's an experience involved. Because you're getting to know who he is. So it's amazing when you meet somebody that really knows his name, and they say something simple like, he is mighty. You can feel that. Oh, they actually know. Or you meet somebody and they know his name and they say, you know, he's my provider. And they know that. It's like, whoa, they know that. They know him. Even if you don't feel like you know him in that way, it's amazing when you know his name. Do you know him? So the first thing today, though, that I want to talk about is change. What do you think about change? Don't like it. It's good. Challenging. Exciting. I think it's interesting how some people think they like it and some people don't think they like it. And probably the people that think they like it don't like it as much as they think they like it. And the people who don't think they don't like it probably like it more than they think they like it. So those of you that, you think you don't like change, well, I have a new car outside for you. Do you like that change? Yeah, we like change sometimes. And, obviously, those of you that really think you like it, there are times, I can assure you, that change comes and you are not so giddy as you think you should be, right? So change, it's how do we think about change? I read, Henry Ford, the guy who did the assembly line of cars, early days. He said this about change. He said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So I've been kind of contemplating change. I'm getting older, not old. We have eternity, so it's not that big of a deal, but I'm getting older, and there's this saying that says, it's hard for old dogs to learn new tricks. You hear that? I feel that. In our lives, there are certain seasons where it's like just big change is taking place, right? I think about myself as a 13-year-old and the amount of change that was taking place in my life, physically, biologically, mentally, socially, was extreme. Then there was when I graduated from high school in 18, massive change. I moved to a different country, I did stuff, and then I moved to another country, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was in the midst of change. So, some of you here are probably in either one or two of those situations. And then obviously when we get married, big change, right? Anybody married can say that involves some change. Even if your partner is somebody that's a lot like you, there is some change that goes on. And then when you have kids, if you have kids, another big change. Now I've kind of I'm on the other side of all those things, and I'm thinking, man, I'm kind of just now trying to hold everything together. I don't want to think about change, because I just need to hold this all together. Anybody like me? Okay, good. There's at least a couple. So that happens, and change can be scary. But if we don't change, we can't grow. And not only that, but change is going to happen whether you want it to or not. Did you know that? I think somebody said, change is inevitable, but progress is optional. So we want change that leads to progress, don't you? Raise your hand if you're with me and if you're awake. Okay, good. But change is hard. I think change is hard. Listen to this. A guy named Craig Rochelle said this. He says, change is hard because people overestimate the value of what they have and underestimate the value of what they may get if they give that up. I will say it one more time. Change is hard because people overestimate the value of what they have and underestimate the value of what they may get if they give what they have up in order to get that thing. And he also said, there are only 2 times when people change. When they have to and when they want to. You know, for example, exercise. You know, you go to the doctor and he says, you know, if you don't get out there and exercise, you're going to continue to live a depressed life. You know, if you just get out, you're going to. So all of a sudden, oh, I have to, because that's going to have an effect on my work. It's going to have an effect on my family. So your doctor tells you have to change. Or I want to exercise because it's going to be good for me, right? I think about stop smoking. Stop smoking or you're going to die. You can get lung cancer. Or maybe you want to stop smoking. Put more into your work. Do a better job at work. Or you're fired. Or you want to do a good job at work. So you change. You either have to or you want to. Those are when we change. So we will never know how good the new is unless we let go of the old. And so what needs to change? Do you know and do you care? Do I know? Do I care? Am I just comfortable where I'm at? You know, I think some of us live in a state of frustration and anger, and there can be all kinds of things. But the question is, do you want that to change? Are you willing to let go? My son, a few of my kids actually have blankets that they love, and they hold on to them, and they sleep with them, and they bring these blankets everywhere. So these blankets get all kinds of garbage on them, duck poop, dirt. They get dragged everywhere. And sometimes my wife in particular, will go and say, I need to wash your blanket. And what do? Hold on to the blanket. Why? Why would you hold on to that nasty thing? You know? Just give it to me. I gotta clean it. We gotta put it in the washer. And then we gotta dry it, and you're gonna get it, and you're gonna sleep with it, and you're gonna hold it. It's gonna be warm and dry and clean. But you know what's the hardest part for them? Is when they don't have anything to hold on to. That's the hard part about change. We like the result of the change, and we may want to get rid of the negative of our current situation, but the hardest part is between those two. When you don't, like, what do I hold on to? Panic. Change. So are you willing to let go of that dirty, stinky blanket? Change. Now, I want us to look at Genesis chapter 32, 23 to 32. And I'm just going to read it off the screen here. After, this is the story this is one of those really weird stories in the Bible, okay? Not like there's not a lot of them, but this is one of them. And it is profound, and it is weird. I'll just say it's weird, okay? That's my extent of my expressions for it. So let's read. This is Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac. So after taking them to the other side, he's with his whole family and everything that he has, and they're kind of in a caravan moving west. And it says, after taking them to the other side of the river, he sent over all his possessions. And this left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was linked. Can you hear me now? I could hear me. So in the midst of the consequences for their sin, God comes to them and he gives them a promise. He says, "Through the seed of the woman, I will crush the head of the serpent." And so immediately, as soon as humanity messed up, God says, "I'm going to fix it." Isn't that so? God is so good. Amazing. You know, people say, like, how could he let sin come in? Well, he immediately promised a solution for the problem that came from us. So he's just good. I can't explain all of that. I won't get into all of that. But so then this is kind of a continuation of that. Abraham then got called, and God said, "You're going to be a blessing, and through your seed, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed." And so these prophetic things going on, Isaac as well, continuation. And so Jacob he's in that family. Totally messed up, dysfunctional family, by the way. So again, I love what Luis said, whosoever. Whosoever. God is for whosoevers. We learn that every step of the way through the Bible. So Jacob, his name means, let's see, who is Jacob? His name means fighter, deceiver. Right? We've talked about name descriptive of character. So that's what his name means. Remember when his mom became pregnant, immediately, it says like there was turmoil within her. And there were these twins inside of her fighting. And then she had to go to God about it, and God had to speak to her. But then she goes and she delivers the boys, and Esau, Jacob's brother, comes out first, but Jacob is grabbing a hold of his brother, holding him as he's coming out. And so that's another description. They call it heel grabber, kind of a fighter. It also has the connotations of a deceitful person, doing whatever it takes to win. That's Jacob. And then you read the story. If you read through Genesis, it's interesting. There's so much to this, so I don't want to get lost in so much. But he ends up going to his brother and stealing the birthright by giving him a bowl of soup, lentil soup. Whenever I eat lentil soup, I think about Jacob and Esau. He deceives his brother out of that blessing of the birthright. And then he deceives his father, who's old Isaac. And his father was meant to give Esau the firstborn son's blessing. And Jacob goes in there and he deceives his father, deceives his brother. He's a bad dude. And so his father ends up blessing him. How could you do this to me? And again, he was just a guy who would do whatever it takes to get ahead. Jacob. And so his brother plans his murder. Says Esau begins to plan, how is he going to kill him? So it says then that because of that situation, his mom's like, my boy, you better get out of here. Your brother wants to kill you. So Jacob gets on the Ryanair flight he leaves, he goes away, and he ends up meeting with his cousins and distant relatives. And he finds himself there. It's another massive story within that, but he finds the love of his life, Rachel. He also marries Leah because his cousin deceives him. So now the deceiver is getting deceived, and he's not liking it as much in this situation. And his cousin just over and over deceives him. Deceives him in his marriage situation, deceives him in his pay. It says, you changed my pay 6 times. So Jacob's there. He's afraid of going back because his brother has been planning to kill him, but he's stuck in this situation working for his cousin, and his cousin is taking all the money. He's being successful, but he's not seeing any comeback return from his labor. And he works for him. It says he works for Rachel for 7 years, Leah for 7 years, and then for Laban to get some flocks, he works for him 6 years. So he is 20 years in a difficult situation because he's running away from his past. That's Jacob. And then it says in Genesis 31:3, things just got bad. Genesis 31:3 says, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Change. 20 years. I don't know if he's in his 40s, but I think he's in his 40s, like me. Change. 20 years. I've been in Ireland almost 20 years. 20 years. And God directs Jacob towards huge change. So, God says to him, Jacob, change, go back, because that's where your promise is. But at the same time, God was saying, go back into the greatest fear of your life. The thing you've been running from the last 20 years. So I want to talk about boundaries of change. There are boundary lines you must cross in order to change. get off this stage. I got to step off the stage. Right? Scary. This is what it says in Genesis 32:22. The same night he arose, because he is actually on his way to do what God told him to do. Now, he's left Laban. That's another whole massive story. He leaves Laban, and he's obeying what God has told him to do. And it says the same night he arose, he took his 2 wives, his female servants, his 11 children, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok, which is a river. So he crosses the boundary line of where he was. And he sent his family ahead. You know, at this moment, he's left and he's beginning to cross over into the land that on his way to where God wants him to be. And then some people come to him and say, your brother's coming, and he's got 400 men with him. So he's begun to move into this change and obeying God, and immediately all his worst fears start to arrive, right? Like, when there's 400 men at this time, that was an army coming. So what does Jacob do? He sends his wives ahead. Okay, that's funny to me. All right, I think I lost you, but that's funny. But his greatest fears coming toward him. And it says he is alone, and it is night. But when I was reading different commentaries about this story, and a lot of the commentaries kept bringing up the fact that Jabbok, the river, Jacob, and wrestle are all very, very similar. It's like there's this deep connection between these three. This is how you say Jabbok, Yabok. This is how you say Jacob, Jacob. And this is how you say wrestle, Abak. They're all super similar. And so the way I'm looking at these things, these are all boundary lines that we have to cross when we want to see change. There are physical boundaries that you have to cross, but you know, sometimes the biggest boundary you have to overcome is you. To change, you gotta deal with yourself, who you are. Jacob had to deal with who he was, and so he was alone, walking into change. But not only that, it says that there was this man who came, an assailant came and attacked him. He begins to wrestle. It's very weird. So they wrestle. And so at the boundary of change, we come to grips with what we will lose and what we will gain. I remember I was trying to convince Heather to marry me because I knew she should. And finally she agreed to it. And but then there was this moment where I came to a place where I realized, hold on a second. If I'm saying yes to her, I'm saying no to everybody else. So I had to come to terms with what I was going to lose and with what I was going to gain. Hallelujah. I gained Heather. You're with me? So at these boundary places of change where we're confronted with change, we got to come to terms with what are we going to gain and what are we going to lose. Yeah. So God told Jacob to return, and Jacob is obeying, but he has to come to terms that right now in this moment he may lose everything. His brother's coming. The one who was planning his murder is coming with 400 men. So I want to talk about embracing change. That's a common phrase used, embracing change. I think this is the story that really epitomizes that phrase, embrace change. It says, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Whoa, what a fighter. So Jacob came to the place where all he could do was hold on. All I can do is hold on. And he was famous for that, actually. That was his name, heel grabber. I think this is interesting that the thing that was Jacob's greatest negative trait, God could redeem that to become something positive. His tenacity in his self-sufficiency could be changed to a tenacity of faith. Isn't that amazing? How God can do that? The thing that you think is so ugly about you, that he could make that into something beautiful. So awesome. God, with God. Amazing. When I was in Alaska, we were meeting with Heather's oldest brother, and he showed me this video. He had one of those, what do you call those cameras that you can put on your helmet? GoPro. He had a GoPro on the helmet, and he was starting to love mountain biking. And he was on a downhill ski trail, mountain biking, and he was all by himself, and he hit this huge jump, and you just see him flying through the air. He told me he flew 35 feet in the air. It was an amazing, and then he crashed. And his leg came out of his hip. And in the video, you see it's all wobbly, and then you see that he says, I was trying to stand up here, and then you see him fall back down. He couldn't do anything, couldn't walk, he was stuck by himself. Thankfully, he had his phone, and he called the paramedics, and the ambulance came, and they had to, I don't know how they rescued him. They took four-wheelers or quads or ATVs up the mountain to carry him out. So 35, he said he knew it was 35 feet because his phone told him, because it tells you how far. Anyway, that's what it took. But in this situation, the guy Jacob was wrestling, all he had to do was touch him. But I think it's so interesting, it says that he saw that he could not prevail against Jacob. But all the guy had to do to mess with him was touch his hip. That's weird. So he touches him. And so Jacob, again, I think he's in a situation of losing his self-sufficiency. He's stepped into God's change for him, and now he's having to confront his greatest fear, moving towards that as he moves towards God's blessing and promise for him, yet having to move towards what he's been running from for 20 years. And now God's made it so he's got a limp. You know, I think we should probably learn to not be afraid to come to the end of ourselves. I think the Bible really shows us that clearly, because you know what? We fight not to go through difficulty, don't you? I don't want to go through difficulty. Raise your hand if you don't want to go through difficulty. Yes, you are with me. We don't want to, do we? But do you know, isn't it amazing how much blessing comes very often on the other side of the difficulties when God brings them? I know I've experienced it in my life. We are scared to not be self-sufficient, but sometimes when we become God sufficient, that's a great blessing, when we lose our self-sufficiency. So, I wish I could pour it into you right now. That truth, that is a powerful truth, fundamental as a Christian. Lose your self-sufficiency. That's the direction God brings you. He brings us into that change. That's the way he's bringing Jacob. And so then the last one, okay? The last one I want to talk about is transformational change. Probably when we first talked about change, you thought I would be just talking about a new diet or exercising more or, being a good worker at work. But I'm not really talking about that kind of change, although that's super good and helpful and positive. But this story is really about transformational change. And can you just say big change? Transformational change is where the whole you changes. You know the caterpillar that becomes the butterfly? That's a transformational change. He didn't just lose some weight. He, starts drinking flowers, not chewing on leaves. He flies through the air rather than crawling in the dirt. Transformational change. So it's so radical. This kind of change, I just wrote down some of the things that it changes in us. Attitudes, thoughts, behaviors, loves, relationships, desires, habits, pursuits, insecurities, strengths, weaknesses. The change that God was doing in Jacob was going to touch every piece of him, eventually. Yeah. And so this is where God touches him, and he says, Jacob, what's your name? He doesn't say, Jacob, what's your name? He says, what's your name? What is your name? Jacob's name was Fighter Deceiver. What do people call you? I remember going, it's funny that when you go visit family, how you may have changed massively, but when you go back to family, you're still that 8-year-old little boy to them. Isn't it funny how that works? You could be 65 and your brother still pick on you, tease you, whatever. Isn't it? It's so funny. What do they call you? What's your name? So God says to him, what's your name? And, when we were, I don't know if they do this in Ireland, when my brothers and I, when we would be wrestling, my brothers would get their arms around my neck and be choking me. I know in jiu-jitsu you tap, but my brothers were always, you have to say mercy. Mercy! Okay, you won. Once you say mercy, then they know they won. And so this man touches his hip and says, what's your name? And when Jacob's saying his name, he's saying mercy. I was watching a documentary about a world-famous boxer last night. I was watching it, actually. His name was Sugar Ray Leonard. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he had 10 title fights, and I guess he won 5 different weight classes. That's crazy. 5 different weight classes. He was a world champion. And but he said something like this in the documentary I was watching. He said, an amazing champion, but he said, the greatest freedom I've experienced and the greatest victory for my life, for my marriage, for my children, was when I admitted I was an alcoholic. I say it again, sure. He said something like this: the greatest freedom I've ever experienced and the greatest victory for my life, for my marriage, for my children, was when I admitted I was an alcoholic. When Jacob is saying to God, I'm Jacob, he's saying, I'm deceiver, I'm fighter, I'm self-sufficient one. So in order for change, transformational change to take place in Jacob's life, he had to move from being self-sufficient, I got this, to being God-sufficient. And it's in that moment when he says, I am Jacob, God says, your name's not Jacob anymore. Your name's Israel. You know what Israel means? God fights. So he moves from being I fight and I deceive to God fights for me. And that change for Jacob didn't just affect him, it affected Israel, all his kids after him. Isn't that amazing? Powerful. But the starting place is admitting who you are to God. So what's your name? I know we're talking about God's name, but he says, what's your name? Winning and limping. And so it says that, I'm changing your name to Israel because you prevailed. I think that is so hilarious that God says to Jacob, you won. But Jacob's just said mercy, and he's leaving limping. And he won. And do you see that in the limping is the victory? Ooh. So, don't be afraid to limp, my brothers and sisters. Don't be afraid to look the fool, my brothers and sisters. Don't be afraid to feel weak and show it to God, my brothers and sisters. That's a good place to begin.